In a recent study, they found phthalates, flame retardants, and UV filters in children's mattresses. The heat of children's bodies were causing these toxic chemicals to leach out. The toxins lower children's IQs more than lead. There's no equivalent to the FDA when it comes to our home goods. Over 50% of microplastics in the ocean are from acrylic paint. Instead of using acrylic paint, use this instead. Here's why your new floor is making you sick. These chemicals are banned in children's toys, but are still in your flooring. 25% of pesticides are sprayed on. Here's what you need to know about children's toys. This is the next frontier in health that no one is really talking about. Here's how you can improve the lighting in your home. 30 to 40 million Americans struggle with this, and many don't even know. Here's a company you can call if you're concerned about mold. When trees were compared to drugs, here's what they found.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Living Light. As always, we have a fascinating and interesting topic, something that I'm certainly interested in, and I know you're going to be interested in, especially as we start unpacking. Today with me, I have my guest, Carrie Denning Jackson. Her and I met through Genius Network. We were actually on a call where lighting and the health of our lighting was being discussed, and Carrie and I were having kind of backdoor conversations with each other, talking about how important this information is and how little the average person knows, including myself at one point. And I'm still a student. I'm still learning, still acquiring knowledge. And that's why Carrie's going to be such a great interview today, because I'm going to learn a lot of new things. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot of new things. And we're going to work on something that we may not realize is influencing the quality of our life, the quality of our health, and that of our loved ones and our children as well. So let's dive right into it. Carrie, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you. This is fun to be here. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So what would you call your title? What is it that I should be referring to you as we dive into this topic of the health of our building and our environment?
I would say it's coming from, I don't know if there's a specific title per se, but my interest and passion around this is coming kind of in multiple ways. First, innovation in the built environment has been my career for 15 plus years. But then also I'm coming at it through the lens of a mom, which I think is a concerned parent. And so I'm marrying these two pieces of caring a lot about my built environment. And we'll get to all of this, but I think about it from the home to the building all the way through to the neighborhood.
Mm.
And then also, being incredibly, again, caring and thoughtful about what I do as a parent. So it's this combination of things that really is what gets me into the idea of how the places we live can either help us thrive or can make us sick. And so that's how I came up with the name of Place as Medicine as the organization that I've founded and I'm working on right now.
Yeah, Mama Builder Bear is what's coming up
Yes,
for me. That's
yes,
your
yes.
unofficial title for today.
All right, that's good. Mama Builder Bear. I like it.
There's nothing, more powerful, I think, than being a parent. And when we become a parent, we look at the world through a totally different lens, right? We look at everything through a different lens, from our kitchen cabinets, right? Or how easy are they to access? And of course, to building materials or furniture materials, if we're buying a mattress or garments for our children. You have a 4.5-year-old boy. And, I think that's when my son was born. He's 14 and a half now. So about 10 years earlier. But what always came up for me was just being extra cautious of what we bring into our home. And what you're saying is it's not just what we put into our body, right? That's probably the most inner work that we can do, to the materials that we wear, to the materials that we sit on, to the stuff that we breathe in, to the materials that our homes are built of, and of course how the neighborhood is built. I mean, all of those things, are necessary to take into consideration. And most people kind of stop at what they eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we kind of work our way out from there, maybe we can just go into right into the discussion. What are some of those considerations, maybe starting inwardly, and then working our way out
Yeah,
concentrically from there?
it's so much stuff, and we'll hack through it slowly.
Sure.
I think actually some of kind of the basis of this and the way people can consider it was actually, something I'd been thinking of. But then, the last time we spoke, some of the conversation we had really like spurred and solidified some of this thinking in that the places we live in are really nurturing places. And so, what can we do to create the conditions and the shell and kind of like literally the home where we can thrive? And, if we can create that, I don't know, you can call it a nest almost. If we can create those conditions for ourselves and our families, we're setting us up so well to then, eat the healthy food and make sure we exercise. But we can do all those things. We can exercise and eat the healthy food. But if our nest isn't set up in a way that's, accretive and going to help us, it's going to detract. And so you're going to not have the benefits you want to have for you and your family. So, that it was great talking to you about that and kind of like crystallizing that thinking. Um, when we think about all of this stuff, yeah, I like to go from, the individual, the home, the building to the neighborhood. And there's so many ways you can approach this. It's not even as easy as saying it's a layer cake. All of this stuff is interconnected. And so I think let's start first with materials, for example, and talk about the materials in our homes and, some concerns and then some solutions. And I'm just going to pick a few because honestly, you could do everything. I could talk about the soundproofing in this room I'm in right now, but my goal here is for people to walk away with, a thinking of wow, like let me look around my environment and let me think about the choices I have to make it a more healthy place for me. So this hopefully is just the beginning, but just a few examples I'll mention. One, we spend a third of our lives on our mattresses, and our children, or especially babies, spend a lot more time on their mattresses. And this is one where whenever I talk to people about tweaks you can make in your home, this is one of the first ones I say to make, though it is a little bit more expensive, so maybe a little bit lower down on the list. But certainly if you have a child, you really, really want to be mindful of the mattress and just bedding in general you're choosing. There was a recent study out of University of Toronto with this woman, Miriam Diamond. It was kind of two parts. And what they did is they did a study of different phthalates, flame retardants, and then UV filters where they were kind of coming out in a room. And what they learned is that all of these chemicals were being emitted around the bed for children. And they were like, why is that? What's causing that? Why are these all being emitted around the bed? And what they realized is that the heat from children's bodies, because they tend to run hot, was actually making it such that these chemicals were leaching into the room. And so you have these mattresses that, if they're a synthetic mattress, if it's not made from like a wool or a bamboo or one of these other materials, it's, likely it's a synthetic. And if it's a synthetic material, it is often treated with a flame retardant. And so manufacturers will say, oh, well, it's in the foam, it's not getting out. And turns out that like, no, it actually is getting out because the heat is causing it to leach out. And they did a subsequent study where they looked at 16 different mattresses. This was in Canada. But they looked at 16 different mattresses that, were likely manufactured or were manufactured throughout North America. And I believe they were diverse in terms of price point. And what they found is that even in some that said they didn't use flame retardants, there were some in there, and even ones, I believe even ones that said they didn't use them actually had some that were banned. It was something like that was outrageous and egregious. And these, flame retardants are the number one contributor to IQ. There's a certain type called polybrominated diphenyl ethers, and they're been somewhat phased out, but there's a study that showed that they were the number one contributor to IQ even before lead. So just to paint the picture, to be incredibly mindful about, even something like a mattress. I think what's really problematic in this space in general, and something that is really unfair that the consumer has to, wade through, but there is no equivalent of the FDA. Um, there are no nutrition facts. There is no ingredient list generally for your home goods.
Hmm.
Ingredient lists, like if you go on a West Elm or a CB2 and you go down to materials, you're not going to see the full description of something. Maybe you will, but you often have to ask and, write them an email of, hey, what is in um, that upholstery? Is it foam? Has it been treated for flame retardants? You have to follow up and ask those things. Um, and it is a really, really, um, I think, frustrating and unfair to the consumer that that is the case. Um, so
And
that's
that,
just covering something like the material in the mattress. And I can keep going, but I don't know if you want to help guide
no,
that in some way.
this is great. I'm taking lots of notes because we, of course, we spend so much time even before the child is born preparing the room that they're going to sleep in. And we get kind of caught up in the decorative aspect of it, right? And many parents paint the room
Well,
before
I'll
the
get into
child.
paint too.
Yeah, and then they're buying all new stuff, so things are off gassing, right? Then they're of
Hmm.
course buying a new mattress, and it only makes sense what you said about the heat activating the
Hmm.
release of those compounds. So it even if they were testing it but not testing it with the heat equivalent of a baby on it, then they could be missing it, right? So they could,
Hmm.
just given the benefit of the doubt for now, they could be making an honest mistake, right? Saying that, hey, it doesn't leach these chemicals, but they're not accounting for the body temperature and how much time that child is spending, right? If we're lucky, they're spending a third or more in that bed, but if we're unlucky, they're spending it in a mattress that's creating a whole bunch of health issues for them.
Hmm.
And I love what you said about IQ. I mean, I didn't love it, but it's crazy to think that,
Hmm.
right? That something like that, we're taking fluoride out of our water, but the very thing that could be sabotaging their IQ and quality of life is literally right under their noses in their mattress.
Yeah.
So, and
And
you know, I'm sorry, I'll just finish with this thought. You're absolutely right about not knowing what things are made out of, right? There's no label on a lot of items that we buy, and just going back to this analogy earlier, or this visual is like we focus on what's going inside, but our home is an extension of our body, which is an extension of our neighborhood, which kind of extends into our surroundings beyond that. So as is the microcosm, so is a macrocosm. And we want to start being, as consumers, much more aware of not only what's going in our environment, but what environment we're creating for ourselves. And at least given the opportunity, we could make better choices. But I don't think we are really given that opportunity or education or awareness around things either.
no, we're definitely not given the education. I mean, this is something where I've polled a few friends, architecture schools, construction, and I've asked, hey, are you required to take a healthy materials course? Have you taken one? And no, it's usually an elective, and usually only a small portion have taken it. And so there just isn't that level of awareness, unfortunately, even in the field itself. But
Mm,
I think what is kind of an optimistic piece of this is that, when you are making these decisions around your children's room or the rug to buy, I would just say to take a step back and look and wonder, hey, what is this material that I'm seeing, and could it be problematic? And I think there's levels of research you can do to kind of understand, okay, what is going on here, what's not. And there is an educational piece, which I'll talk about specifically with paint. But what I do really like is that you can choose a material that sidesteps all the problems. So if you want, you can choose the mattress made out of, the organic wool, the organic latex. You can choose a rug that is made out of jute. You can, soon IKEA is phasing out foam in 20 by
mm,
2030, which is great. And there's foam companies where the foam is made out of seaweed. So we can start to choose just solid wood furniture as opposed to particle board with veneer, or you can make those decisions and say, look, solid wood is way more expensive. I'm going to buy this other one and I'm going to let it off gas. Like there are those decisions. And I think paint is a good one where, it's helpful to explain a little bit about paint. And then there are options that, again, sidestep the problems of your basic acrylic paint.
Mm.
So acrylic paint, this is your, normal paint you put up on the wall, your Sherwin-Williams or your, Ecos or whichever one you're buying, your Martha Stewart. And, generally you're buying the low to zero VOC paint because that's the one that, makes sense because a volatile organic compound, you've read enough that, oh, it's toxic, it has that paint smell. The challenge there is that even zero VOC's paint still has stuff in it that's not good for you. It could
Mm.
have, different pigments, different binders that are problematic. And when the EPA regulates, at least EPA in the US, I'm not sure in the Canadian context, but they're regulating the VOCs that affect ozone, not the VOCs that affect your health. So it's just this weird dynamic where, as the consumer, and I've been guilty of this, you buy the zero VOC paint because that is the option, and you're not aware of these dynamics. Paint is also 58% of the microplastics in the ocean come from acrylic-based paint. You know,
What?
yes, not all of that is in your home. Like a lot of that is from ships or from docks, and so you can kind of say, okay, it's not all from painting my child's bedroom, but there's a really important circularity here with the materials in our homes. It's not just about the health of you and I living in our homes. It's also, how is this thing created? How is it transported? Um, what is it like when it's in our home? And then what happens when it goes to landfill or it decays in some way? And so I really think it's important to think about the whole life cycle. I think for some people that's overwhelming. Okay, focus on the end occupant, but it's why like for me, moving away from foam is really important, or moving away from plastic in general is really important. So with paint, I highly urge people who are listening, consider alternates. So there is chalk paint, there is milk paint, there is one called mineral paint, which at the company I work at, we're actually going to pilot it, and it's beautiful paint. There's a really great company out of California called Alchemist that came about. Their CEO, I believe, was painting a room during COVID and with normal paint. And she was like, why does it still smell? I thought this was zero VOC. And that's how she got down this rabbit hole of let me use what literally cavemen were using to paint in the caves. And let me make mineral paint, which there are other brands out there that do this, but it's a natural material. It bonds with the wall, so it's durable. It is antifungal. It is naturally fire resistant. In some cases, at least with Alchemist, it absorbs CO2. So there's all these amazing elements
Wow.
of natural materials. And again, you can just sidestep the problem and go towards something that, yes, in this case, it's more expensive, but you're also, in this case, I'm getting very down into details. You don't need a primer. It's durable, so you're not repainting constantly. So I think more and more and more as people care more about health, my goal is, really to share this knowledge and hopefully really make a market for some of these products to reduce their prices.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing. I already learned a lot of new
Yeah.
things. So mineral paint, does it, I guess you use the same painting techniques as you would with an acrylic paint. And you brought up something that was new to me and it just makes sense. Obviously, it's acrylic, which is a plastic, and
Yeah.
you don't think that you're painting with plastic. So that just kind of blew my mind. I never made that connection before. And I'm someone who thinks of all the, a lot, not everything, obviously, clearly, but I
Yeah.
these thoughts go through my head and I would have never even connected those two things. So is an oil-based paint better, or is that just as bad in terms of
I would assume it's not recommended only because, to be honest, it hasn't been on the better materials list. And my sense would be no, because you need turpentine to remove it. And that's its own chemical.
hmm,
You don't want children around it, things like that. So I would say no on oil, but um, yeah, and some of the paints do have different techniques and different ways you have to train people to use them. Um, But with mineral paint, it's just as beautiful, just as many shades. So it's a good option.
That's awesome. I'm excited for my next painting project because I'm going to
Yeah,
use mineral paint. Can you just paint it over top like of an old acrylic coat? Does that
yeah,
make a difference?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What's another example of like thinking bigger about the products that we buy, not just about how it affects us, but how the entire process has an impact on the world?
Yeah. I think this is a really important one also, and I think paint's a good one, but um, maybe even more tangible one is with flooring. So, you know, a very ubiquitous type of flooring is vinyl flooring. You
Mm.
can buy it on Home Depot by the roll. It's very inexpensive. It looks just like wood. There's so many advantages to it, but it's made of polyvinyl chloride or PVC. And not only is PVC a plastic, some PVC has mostly phased out, but some PVC has phthalates added to it. Um, so phthalates are what makes plastic malleable, and they're known endocrine disruptors. So you have to be mindful that some PVC like literally has endocrine disruptors that have been banned in children's toys, but they're still in your flooring. Um, so it makes no sense. Your child is playing with the toy on the floor, and that could be, the same level of toxicity. It's that has been banned. It's nuts. But with PVC, I think it's another one where it's really important to note that when it's created, the areas of the world where it's created, in the United States, it's known as Cancer Alley in Louisiana. In Canada, it's known as Chemical Valley. And in Chemical Valley, it's an indigenous population, and they actually report having fewer boys because of the endocrine disrupting nature, hormonal disrupting nature of PVC. So you have these fence line communities that are really horribly impacted
Hmm.
by the inputs to these products. Then the distribution with if anyone remembers, there was a big train crash in East Palestine, Ohio, a huge smoke plume.
Oh
That
yeah, I
was
remember
fine.
that.
Yeah, that was vinyl chloride that goes into things like our vinyl flooring. So I say that all to say we're making these decisions in our homes around the materials that are, one, not great for us, but then two, they do have really like harmful full downstream upstream impacts that I think is really important for people to consider.
It's so interesting how we can be so myopic in the way we think, right? Are there different departments that regulate these things? Like, why would a chemical be banned in children's toys, but not banned across the board?
So I don't know the answer to that. I think it's just the way these different, FDA, Food and Drug Administration, like you have EPA. EPA has the Toxic um, Substances Control Act called TSCA, which in the U.S., is purportedly tests and regulates chemicals, but it doesn't have a lot of teeth to it, and it's a very slow moving process, and there's a lot you have to prove about the chemical before it can be, taken out of circulation. Very few chemicals have, um, and so it's this bizarre thing to me where you have a flame retardant that is leaching or it's breaking down into dust. And children are eating it. They're ingesting it because it falls onto the rug and it's in the toy and they're mouthing things. And yet, like, it would be, it's, you're not saying it's like it should be under food and drug in some way, or it should be looked at holistically.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed at a policy level, or at least the consumer needs to have a greater understanding of it. And so we can push industry because industry moves so much faster than at the upper policy level. But
Yeah,
it is nuts that it's not this holistic view.
yeah, I heard a stat, and I don't know if I'm sure the number keeps climbing, but we're exposed to like 84,000 different chemicals over the
Yeah.
course of a year. Maybe you have more updated stats than I do on that, but it just seems like everywhere we turn, everywhere we smell, everything we put into our mouth, everything we put into our skin, it just seems like a never-ending battle. And it's remarkable that we're even alive, right? When you think about all the things that are trying to like just, you know, chip away at our health, so to speak. And it seems like this is a conversation whose time is probably overdue, in my opinion, in your opinion, but certainly its time has come. I'm curious, not to get into the political side of things too much, but just I know we have an administration that's perhaps looking at things a little bit more holistically and connecting the dots a little bit more. So hopefully there's some solutions that come in that are
Yeah.
coming down the pipeline. Are you hopeful of that, or what are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
I again, like, I don't want to bring politics in, but I am frustrated that you have on one side a portion of the country that is, or the portion of the administration that really wants to make America healthy, but then you're cutting things, in other realms that could contribute to health.
Mm,
So it's not, again, it's not this like, I wish there was more of a systems thinking approach. Hey,
right.
if we do this here, this is going to happen here. That's not the case. And that's not how, government budget works or departments work. Um, so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that someone will come in and say, hey, actually, pesticides are really bad for us. And let's really think about this, this, and this. Or actually, why are we using flame retardants? Because it's actually in several of the states where there's been more stringent bans, it is coming from the fire departments. They are the ones saying we don't want these chemicals because they are breathing them in and they are getting cancer.
Mm.
And they're not actually effective in terms of mitigating fire. So
Yeah, I don't think I've ever read an article that said, "Thank God you had a fire flame retardant mattress because your house wouldn't have burnt down." Right?
yeah, no, it just emits chemicals that are more problematic. So
Yeah, scary thought. And I know that these flame retardants were kind of lobbied by the cigarette industry, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken. Is that correct?
yes, it is correct. Yes,
Okay.
yeah,
So yeah, so it's like a company that doesn't really care about your health, lobby to get these chemicals into your couches and mattresses and
mhm.
children's mattresses, I'm sure, and clothing as well, right? Children's clothing has flame retardants in it, if I'm not mistaken, or is that something that's been outlawed now?
If you
Okay.
want to listen to and read a pretty wild expose on all this, the Chicago Tribune did a whole piece on flame retardants, a multi-story piece on flame retardants, and um, it's just it's wild. You know, some of the people referenced in the court cases were fake. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
Hmm.
So,
So let's talk brass tacks. So let's say you're either renovating your house or you're taking this to heart and you're saying, you know what, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I want to, just kind of go, to from the ground up, so to speak, and work on my health. So not just what goes in my body, but what I'm surrounding myself with and in. Or maybe you have a new child that's on the way. What advice would you give to that person? Like,
yeah,
what should I
definitely.
buy? What should I be aware of? Like, and even if you want to kind of talk me through or talk us through what that would look like here's what I would do if you're starting
Yeah.
from scratch.
So there's a bunch of things that I would do. I think first and foremost, and we're getting outside of the home a little bit, but I would make sure I spend as much time in nature outdoors as possible if I
Mm,
wanted to think about holistically about me and my health and the health of my family. That's absolutely critical. We're not getting, the full spectrum of sun in our indoor environments with LEDs. We can talk about that in a little bit. And so we're in a situation where we're already at a deficit. So getting outside, I would say, number one thing, especially in nature, because nature, the chlorophyll in the leaves is amplifying and reflecting all the great near infrared light from the sun, and that's really beneficial for our bodies. So those would be kind of the first. They're totally free, easy things to do. I would say then next, you really want to look at your cleaning supplies and how often you're cleaning your home. So something like the dust that's in a couch with the flame retardants or the whatever it is, or the PFAS. you want to vacuum that up with a HEPA filter. You want to look at the cleaning supplies and audit them to remove anything with different added scents or with chemicals that you might not want in your home. There's great products, Earthly Ediths, Dr. Bronner's, that are very minimal ingredients to look at. Then I would really go towards, as I said before, anything bedding related. That gets expensive. Mattresses are expensive, but I think if you're going to make the investment, go towards, avoid all the synthetic stuff if you can. Go towards the natural materials, the cotton, the latex, the bamboo, there's one called kapuk. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's this wild looking plant. But I would do that, especially, not just the mattress, but the pillows and the bedding and all of that. I would also really look at anything with upholstery or really any fabric. And another one that people don't know is that, forever chemicals or PFAS, the whole intent of that is water resistance or stain resistance or non-stick, for example. And so if you ever see something that says it's a performance fabric or it's water resistant or stain resistant, it likely has a forever chemical on it. So as much as I'd want to get a couch that is stain resistant, because I have a dog, I have a child, I would avoid that. And I would instead get something that you feel comfortable washing or a darker fabric or something like that. I think that's something people don't realize, that, the convenience of having something that doesn't stain can also come with the forever chemical piece. Then something we didn't touch on was just the flows of things through your apartment. So the air and the water. I think air quality people are probably pretty on the up and up about because of COVID and various forest fires. And so getting that HEPA filter is really important to have. For us, we're in Lower Manhattan and we have a deck. And when we open the doors, the particulate matter, or PM10, which is like soot and dust, just spikes, like alarmingly spikes. Like all of those things about opening your windows at night to get the air in, like, no, not where I live. Like, you're not doing that. Like,
wow,
the German idea of air, not where I live. So air filters are important. And then with water filters, what I'd say is, I was guilty of this too, of, let me just filter my tap water. But, I'm in my shower, my kid's in the tub, like, let's also filter that water too. I think if you can, getting a full home filter is great. That's very hard if you live in an apartment building, or if you're renting. I will send you some follow-on links for good products for your shower, as well as tubs. So, but there are some you can like add on, as well. So those are some tweaks I'd make. I think, we should talk about mold at some point. But then there's, and paint, obviously, we talked about mineral paint and that being a better option. But then there's some really nice things you can do that aren't materials based, but it's, what's the sound in your apartment? Are you playing music? Like, there's calming sounds, there's, binaural beats, there's all sorts of stuff you can do, again, to create this nest that is really healthy for you. So sound is one. Smell is another. All of these are things that can, contribute to your health. So I think that's important to consider, like the art on the wall. Are you making your home something where, if you want, it's easy to have community? Like, are there enough chairs? Do you have, communal spaces? All of these things are factors into how, creating the nest, the quality of life that you want to have.
Yeah, you bring up something that I think is very important for us to take into consideration. A lot of times we don't host people at our homes as much as I remember growing up. We would be at our family friends' homes all the time. Like every weekend we'd be going to somebody else's house. And now as I've gotten older, it seems like we meet at restaurants. And that's a whole different vibe, right? Like bringing the energy of kids running around and and this community and union that happens between families and friends. I think that's so important. The energy and the memories that you create in your home are also, I think, really important too, right?
Yeah.
So, creating a healthy space, but then, as you mentioned, do you have enough chairs to host people? Do you have space to host people? And I feel like that's something that I certainly always enjoy. We had our my brother-in-law and sister-in-law and his kids were over yesterday, so that's a big part of what we like to do. And I find it's certainly happening less and less with restaurants and things like that being more accessible to us. People don't cook as much as they used to. Like the art of having a home cooked meal for a group of people was such a loving act. It takes you a couple days to think in advance and prepare the food, and there's a lot of love that goes into it as well. I don't know if that's something you want to speak about, like the intent that we put into the things that we do in our home, if that's something that you consider as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the community part is, I mean, it sounds, when we're talking about materials and, water and like the idea of, creating a healthy home is about making sure you have seating, but it is really true. Like having that intent um, around your home and setting yourself up for success, I guess that's the right phrase, is really, really important. Yeah, you just kind of alluded to it. Loneliness is a reason people are sick, and community is so important. And, we made a conscious decision a bit ago to make sure we have friends over frequently. And we were in that same bind of like, we don't have enough chairs. Like, what do we do? And like, there are stackable stools you can get and put in the closet and then bring them back out. So, and I think that's just such an important thing and so important when you have kids to introduce them to dinners where there's lots of adults talking and there's other kids running around and mixed generations and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So, yeah, that intentionality. So you're not falling into the trap of, well, oh, I don't have this or oh, I don't have that. It's like kind of, it just goes back to what I kind of prefaced this all of the goal would be for people to walk away and look around their apartment or their street and think, like, well, look at this place. It's enabling. How can it enable me to be as healthy as possible?
Mm. Yeah, that was one of our criteria when we moved into our house. So we live in a cul-de-sac. We have a full court basketball, net set up. We have a huge forest in our backyard and a conservancy. So there's no homes back there, no noise, like full privacy. And I can tell you, coming from a condo, which was on a busy main street, I mean, just the dust, the tire dust that would accumulate on our balcony, just
Mm-hmm.
day after day, you clean it and you're like, oh my God, like I would be inhaling that if I was sitting out here. And of course, I would spend as much time outdoors as I could. But to your point, keeping the windows open allows all that particulate, to get into your home. Brake dust, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
my friend Ian Clark always reminds me of this, that they incinerate bodies, and that incinerated, people dust is in the air. Then you have obviously dust mites and you know spider waste and all that stuff that you're inhaling. So having a good air filter is huge. You mentioned having a good water filtration system, not for what you all drink, but your skin drinks water as well. People need to be reminded of that. You talked about some great home or personal self-care products, which I think is awesome. uh, do you want to talk about clothing? Is that something that you get
I
into at
can
all?
I can talk a little bit about clothing. I'm actually trying to just pull something up to make sure I hit all the pieces. I definitely want to make sure we talk about lighting and then outdoors and mold. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Clothing, yeah, I think it's something I've gotten into from the standpoint of 25% of pesticides are used on cotton. And I think that's just something, again, for people to know that I would love if, when possible, to make the decision for organic cotton so we can push the market in the direction of consumers being like, I don't want these pesticides. I don't want to contribute to workers like being sick because they're, walking around with the pesticide sprayer. So organic cotton when you're talking about towels or your clothing, to the extent you can. I mean, in some cases, like organic cotton leggings just aren't as comfortable as ones with like a little like polyester in them. So I think, make the decisions where you need to. But yeah, I again, going towards organic natural materials as much as possible.
Yeah. My wife and I, a few years ago, when we went down this rabbit hole, I used to have and this might make you cringe, certainly makes me cringe knowing what I know now, but my whole wardrobe used to be Lululemon. And, I traveled quite a bit, and, I just like the convenience of just grabbing a shirt, being able to wear it, not having to iron it, all that good stuff. And then I learned about the materials that I was wearing and how disruptive they could be to our endocrine system. Not that I had any symptoms per se, but once and you can't look back. So I
Yeah.
completely, revamped my entire wardrobe, went to merino wool and organic cotton, as you mentioned, and linen. So those are the kind of fabrics of choice. Hemp clothing is a little bit harder to find than I'd like it to be. So wool was very accessible, and my wife really loves her wool leggings. So there's a few good companies out there that make leggings that are 97% merino wool. There is a little bit of elastane in there for the stretch and durability. But yeah, those could be quite comfortable for people. And what I found is that I didn't give away my Lululemon clothing, and I just kept it in my closet. I didn't know what to do with it. And so I just kind of kept it in there. And anytime I would touch it, I could feel the difference. Like it just felt cold and lifeless.
Huh.
I don't know if that sounds too woo woo for people, but energetically, it just felt very different. And it felt cold to the touch, almost like plastic, which is essentially what it is. Whereas the wool had a warmth to it.
Yeah.
And it just felt so much more comfortable. And all my workout clothing is now wool based. My undergarments are all wool based, and it's just a very, very awesome material, very breathable, very light, and moisture wicking, odor preventing. Like it has like so many superior benefits to wearing
Yeah.
traditional polyester.
Exactly. And that's kind of like it's the equivalent of the sidestepping that I was mentioning of like, instead of buying the foam or the plastic based thing, you can opt for the wool clothing or the silk clothing or whatever it is. I think you brought up something that is triggering a thought around also, um, it's not just bedding and sheets and whatnot, but it's children's stuffed animals is also something that's worth looking at,
Hmm.
and making an investment around ones that are made out of natural materials with natural fillings. I have found that they are much, much more expensive. Again, how can we make the market? But and it's really hard. Like your kids are gifted stuffies from grandparents, and the second they get them, they're attached. And so, like when they're at school, do you take them away? And then there's the ethical question of, well, what do you do with them? Do you donate them, and then someone else is getting these
Yeah.
stuffed animals? But I think that's another one where, again, consider like your child is holding this, they might be eating it, holding it by their face. Like, what is that material that is around them?
Yeah, and they put a lot of stuff in their mouth, right? Even though
Yes.
we try to get them not to, like they're chewing on it, they're licking it, they're biting on it. Like it ends up in places that we don't want it to. And yeah, that's a very, very important consideration is
Yeah.
what is, and maybe it starts with us, right? When we have a friend who has a baby, that we educate them, like we give them a nice, maybe stuffed animal and we educate them, hey, here's what's unique about this one. And then they
Yeah.
can make better and more educated and informed decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. But you do come across kind of as the crazy person. And so, my hope is that, you know, maybe food, it's become a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more normal to say, do you use seed oils? Like it's not quite normal yet, but or does this have food dye in it? And hopefully we can move towards the more of the materials in our homes. But I do recognize that telling your grandparent, please don't get them that stuffy. It's made out of a synthetic material. The grandparent might say like, okay, wow, you're a bridge too far. So um, that's
Yeah.
that's certainly
You
something.
know, my son goes to a Waldorf school, and like they have a fair twice a year. They have a winter fair and a May fair. And they have companies like toy companies that will bring like, it's you don't even really see these in like certain stores anymore, but like wooden toys for children to play with, right? They would be selling like wood-based
Yeah.
toys. And now it makes total sense that they would, because that's obviously a natural material versus something that's made out of plastic. And if kids are putting this stuff into their mouth, it's obviously an issue. And they make felted, stuffies. So like stuffies made out of
Mm.
wool as opposed to polyester and some of these synthetic materials. And yes, they do cost more, but there's other places we can
Yeah.
save money, right?
And maybe you have the mentality of like fewer and better. I know that's
Mm-hmm.
challenging for a child in this day and age, but
Yet
you know,
necessary,
but
right? I think it's
necessary.
it's better to
Yeah.
think that way.
And I'm someone to really, people are interested in this, especially in education. Maria Montessori was actually like a pioneer in some of this healthy materials, healthy spaces stuff. She was a lot of wood, shelving, wood, they call it work, but the things they do at school, making sure there was lighting in the classroom. That was a very important thing, access to sunlight, outdoor space. And so you have so many of these great, people throughout history that are saying exactly what we're saying now. And, it's kind of this obvious, yeah, of course we need sunlight. Of course we need clean air.
Right.
So, but she's a particularly, I mean, she's an incredible character. So,
Yeah, I think Rudolf Steiner
yeah,
was very similar in his philosophy and beliefs, and that's one of the reasons we chose a Waldorf school system is because of that, because we felt that the values that we have in our home were mirrored at the school. So I didn't know that about Maria Montessori. That's good to know.
yeah, it's really, really cool.
Uh, so let's you touched on sunlight, so let's go back to lighting.
That's what I wanted
and
to go
and that
into.
let's talk through that, because that's something I talk about a lot, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, so that our listeners can learn more about how lighting affects a lot of different things. But I'll
Yeah.
let you take it
So,
away.
yeah, lighting is fascinating. And I just interviewed last week a man named Scott Zimmerman, who runs a company called Silas Tech. And it was absolutely fascinating. And he's, working with a bunch of other folks. There's a guy named Roger Schwelt, and I recommend people listen to the podcast he did with Andrew Huberman. And I'll send you the link to it if you're interested more in lighting. But essentially, sunlight is fascinating. It's this wide spectrum, and the visible portion is small compared to the tails, and there's different portions thereof, and they all give us different benefits. So there's portions of sunlight that give us the vitamin D benefits, or we're learning a lot more emerging science around near infrared and what that does to our bodies and how it benefits and supports our metabolism, and has great health qualities. And there's again emerging research, and Scott Zimmerman's been part of this, where we are truly just learning so much about near infrared light. And some of the recent studies have shown that it penetrates actually like incredibly deeply into our skin. It goes up to 8 centimeters. And it's why I advocate going out in the sunlight, because even on a cloudy day, even when you're wearing clothes in the winter, the sun is actually getting through your jacket and your shirt, and it's giving you these great health beneficial, immune boosting, uh, impacts. And what's happened, unfortunately, with LED lights is that we've really truncated the spectrum of what is in our home now.
Mm.
And incandescents used to have not the full spectrum, of course, but they had that component of the near infrared. That's why they get hot to the touch, and you like burn your hand when you take them off. And so we don't have that anymore, unfortunately. And I firmly believe in the reasons why we switched to LEDs from an energy efficiency standpoint. Like, I lead a sustainability team, so I agree with why those moves made sense. I agree with why we have e-glazing on our windows that also prevents the near infrared from entering. But unfortunately, the health impact was never factored in. You think of lighting, and no one at the time really thought. Apparently there was like one person that was like, why are we doing this? Or let's
Mm.
look into this. But you don't really think of it again as being like, a food or a drug. You don't, it's not like FDA is not looking at this. And so
Right.
unfortunately with LEDs, we're just not getting those health benefits. In fact, it could actually be causing, molecular problems for us being on the same spectrum for so many hours a day. So, um, the move is really to get outside as much as possible, take breaks, outdoors, again, under trees, you get that boost, that reflection. Use incandescents, where you can across your home. You don't need to use them everywhere. LEDs do, have a time and place, but your desk lamp, go incandescent for that. Someone recently, a group called Lightwork Home Health came by my apartment about a week ago. They're a group up and coming that's doing these home health assessments. And they looked at my LEDs and this and that. And they were like, okay, at night, dim your LEDs, which is something many of us do anyway, and turn on any lamp that you have that's incandescent, especially anything horizontal, because you're starting to mimic the sunset. But I think just like stepping back, it's important. It's important to know that there is this potential downside with LEDs, and incandescent is an option. Scott Zimmerman also has a product. He's lighting engineer for 40 years that combines the benefits of both the energy efficiency of the LED with the health benefits of incandescent, and it's on his website. I will send you the link. I believe it's Nira, Nira.
Okay. I think, this is a topic that is so, I believe, fundamental and so overlooked. People forget that our mouth isn't the only part of us that eats. Our eyes eat light, our ears eat sound, our skin eats touch, right? So our other senses are receiving information from our environment. And, this conversation wouldn't be possible without light, right? Light runs our lives, like inside of our computers and, the internet and all that other stuff. However, for whatever reason, we kind of take it for granted. We
We
don't
get
realize
more
it.
we get more energy from the sun than we do from food.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the thinking around near infrared is it actually boosts melatonin in our mitochondria. It creates more melatonin in the mitochondria than the pineal gland. And the pineal gland melatonin is what helps you sleep, but the mitochondria melatonin is what, does the whole, process of getting energy to our cells in our bodies. And that's really the emerging thinking of why near infrared is so, so critical. So yes, that's the sunlight is what's, it's helping trees and plants grow, but it's also helping us.
Yeah, it's something that, when we go back to the basics or the physics of health, not just the biology of health, we start realizing that there's so many other inputs that can have a greater impact on our health than we might think. And, many times when it comes to our health, we're focused on movement and exercise, which of course are two spokes in the wheel, but there are other spokes, right? Like the chemicals we talked about today, like the lighting in our homes that we've talked about, spending time outside, getting fresh air, getting that, full spectrum lighting that the sun emits, not just the, visible spectrum, which is what our LED lights help us with. The positioning of the lighting also makes a
Mm-hmm.
difference, because of where the sun would be, right? The sun is this constantly moving source of light in the sky, which, kind of dials our circadian rhythm in, which has, kind of runs all the clocks in our cells on a daily basis. So there's so many little things for us to take away from our conversation today. I know there's probably a million things I could ask you, but I'm just curious, is there anything that I missed that you want to dive deeper into?
There's one thing I want. Well, at some point we'll talk about mold. That'll be a whole other conversation.
Well,
Mold
we
is
could talk about it today. I'm all for it.
mold is a whole thing. Well, briefly on mold. You know, many homes, likely have water damage. Water damage can happen very quickly. Mold can grow very quickly. There is about 25% of the population that has mold sensitivity, and it can manifest in some pretty extreme ways. It's a neurotoxin. You can gain weight, you can lose weight, you can get stomach issues like the sinus issues, the list goes on. And Yeah, it's estimated that 30 to 40 million Americans may have mold exposure.
Wow.
So that's something, again, if there's something going on where you think being in your home is causing it, and it gets better when you're not there, maybe not necessarily on vacation because you might feel better on vacation for other reasons, but if you notice that it's quite bad in your home, definitely get a mold inspector. Don't get the same mold inspector who's doing the remediation. That's a conflict. You can also check out a company called Mold Co. Um, Also, up and coming, they're looking at the medical side of mold, and so they'll do tests of your body, and they provide a medical treatment, part of this shoemaker protocol, so they can help address it in your body. And the home piece is challenging. It's very challenging if you're a renter, but mold is something to definitely be aware of if you're noticing health issues in your home. Um, but I do want to talk about being outdoors, and kind of two pieces there. One is I would push people to evaluate, if you have a backyard, your backyard, what are you putting on your backyard? Um, there's 75 studies linking pesticides to lymphoma. We use a ton of pesticides on our lawns. Lawns were an invention by French aristocrats to show they didn't need land for hunting and farming. It was to show
Mm.
how wealthy they were. If you can turn some of your lawn back to, native plants, if you can, if you can do that, you can help the local ecosystem with, habitat, and it will be better for your family in general. So I would say that about lawns. And then, again, just going back to the benefits of nature, there's this wonderful study that I got to know quite well. I'm on the board of the New York chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and Nature Conservancy was involved in this study in Louisville, Kentucky, which I highly recommend people check out. But it was the first real medical trial of the benefits of trees. They looked at trees as if it was a drug, and it was an NIH funded clinical trial. And they proved that over 2 years, this area of Louisville, Kentucky, 4 square miles, socioeconomically diverse. One area they planted, I believe it was 8,000 trees. One area they didn't. The area with trees, the people living there basically got 7 years back of their life. It's
Wow.
crazy. They saw cardiovascular benefits equivalent to a 10% reduction in cardiovascular disease over 10 years because an inflammatory marker dropped. This is only after 2 years of results. So I'm very curious to see what happens ongoing. But again, the benefits of trees are remarkable. And so, yes, get outside, get outside.
And what level of interaction is that with the trees? Is it just sitting underneath them, touching them, like just being around them?
Well, in this case, it was literally just trees in their neighborhood, and they were smart about where they planted them based on like the fluid dynamics off the highway, and they were mostly evergreen. But they don't quite know what was actually going on. They don't know if the trees were creating like a little immune response in people because, pollen or whatever it
Mhm.
was, and kind of like helping people's immune systems, kickstart. They don't know if it was improved air quality. They don't know if it was some of the good volatile organic compounds coming off the trees. There's so much they're still trying to understand about the mechanism. But it's like an amazing study.
Well, you know what? Until they figure it out, let's just enjoy the benefits, right?
Yes, yes.
That's awesome. I love this. I'm loving this conversation, and we're going to have to do a part two, maybe even a part three, because there's so much to unpack. And we've given people a lot to unpack as it is, given them ways to kind of look at their baby's room a little bit differently, look at the clothing they purchase a little bit differently, even the furniture that they purchase, the mattress, the paints that they use. I mean, there's so much that we covered today. This has been super, super insightful, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for enlightening me. What would you say is a good way for people to connect with you, learn more about your work, and perhaps even reach out to you?
Yeah, I have an Instagram. It's Place as Medicine. That's probably the best way to reach me. I have a website as well. And I am going to start a newsletter. That is my goal. I've not gotten there yet, but you can sign up for it, but you might not receive anything for some time, but Instagram is the best spot.
Amazing. We'll be sure to put those links in the show notes.
Oh,
So again, thank you so so much, Carrie. This is so awesome. I loved our conversation. I appreciate the insights that I received from it. And there's a few things I'm going to put into action immediately. So thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you so much.